If you're looking for a super unique play experience right out of the box, we have the most unique Precons of all time.
I'm Mia, and I love our little Queen Amber.
I'm BZ. She's just so cute. We're the Nitpicking Nerds. We're sponsored by Card Kingdom. Amber's not with you, but you can get the comfort of having Amber on your table with the ease of cardkingdom.com. And if you spend $50 or more on Amber, she'll throw up on the carpet. But if you spend $50 or more with Card Kingdom, you get free shipping.
Card Kingdom is the best place online to get sealed product and singles and just accessories in general. Go check them out, and if you use our link, we have some of our favorites on the site that we can recommend to you.
And we're sponsored by Dragon Shield because they have the best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use code
NERDS
at checkout, you're actually saving 5% of your real money, hard-earned tax dollars that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. That just stays with you, thanks to Dragon Shield.
Moxfield, there's going to be an ad somewhere, but you can't guess where it is because you're a liar if you said you got it right. And we also have a Patreon where you can support people like us and the cats, who is now our third and fourth people. Hi, Miso.
Yeah, hi, Miso. Yeah, you can support us from Patreon directly. You get exclusive gameplay with other creators and celebrity guests and some podcasts and stuff. So go check it out. Definitely highly recommend if you want to see more of us and more of Amber. So these are the most unique Precons of all time. They are really, really bizarre in a lot of cases. We do have a few honorable mentions. I don't think I have any other qualifiers. These Precons are just really weird. There's nothing like any of them, and we're going to talk about them.
They're very unique. There's a lot of Precons out there that are like, ooh, we win by artifacts, ooh, we win by, creature type, and these do not fall into those boxes. So we are going to talk about a couple that are out of the box but are not cool enough to make the top 5. The first one is Timey-Wimey. This is the one from Doctor Who. This is Rose Tyler and the 10th Doctor. He has suspend, and so basically you want to time travel and take suspend counters off all of your stuff to play them for free.
Yeah, you're either removing a bunch of time counters from all of your cards with suspend that you're manually suspending, or suspending with an ability of a doctor or something, or you're adding time counters to things that have vanishing that just also happen to say time counters, so they took that and they're like, hey, here's both of those things. You either want to keep your vanishing things around longer or reduce the wait time on your suspend cards. And it's just like, huh? So there's stuff like Flesh Duplicate, which you want to keep around because it's a clone, and you can add more time counters to it. And then there's Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, which you want to just, rip through the suspend counters as fast as possible, get a bunch of dinosaurs, and then attack for a billion.
I feel like this Precon was a little bit disjointed, right? If you want to go vanishing, that's super cool, and you go a proliferate kind of route. And if you want to go time travel and you suspend stuff and then you remove stuff, I feel like this one kind of went two different directions.
It's because time travel is you can remove from suspend cards and add. It's both.
That's super weird, but super cool. I do like the mechanics of this in general.
Yeah, 10th Doctor can definitely slap, and also Rose Tyler just gets huge, so there's a separate little Voltron thing going on with her, but you also want to kill a 10th Doctor because that's where all the value is coming from, removing all the time counters.
You could just beat face with Rose Tyler. She gets really big.
Next up is another weird deck that I think we've only ever gotten one version of from Commander Master's Precon set. This is Planeswalker Party with Commodore Guff. He wants you to get a bunch of Planeswalkers down because he zaps everybody and then draws cards equal to the number of Planeswalkers you control. Just a very ambitious deck for a Precon. I don't want to say it came out very good, but that doesn't matter really how good these decks are. We're looking for how unique and cool they are. This is just really interesting, but 18 Planeswalkers in the deck with no alternate win condition. You pretty much have to zap somebody with Commodore Guff or with Chandra Legacy of Fire to get things done.
I think this was so unique by Amber because when you usually think about Super Friends, you think about, I don't usually want to be running more than a set number of maybe 10 or something. Even that's really, really high. So to think that this had 18 and it was in Jeskai colors, that is incredibly ambitious. And I feel like what I remember most about this is just the giant bulk of Chandras in here in general. I think one of the good things to remember in here is that Vronos can phase out Planeswalkers, so it does provide a little bit of protection, but all in all, it's just not enough to make this deck viable.
Yeah, that deck didn't really get there. It was a little on the weaker side. I'm sure it's still fun out of the box, but, it didn't quite make the top 5. We're going to get into number 5, though. This is the Eldrazi Unbound Precon. The commander was Zulodok, Void Gorger, 5 and a colorless for a 7/4. Colorless spells you cast with mana value 7 or greater from your hand have Cascade, Cascade. So if you build up all the mana to get a 6-drop in play and then a 7-drop right after that, you get 2 instances of Cascade.
I feel like this is the equivalent of, I don't want to play green, but instead, I still would like big Timmy spells, so why don't we make it colorless? Eldrazi are so well loved, and I'm happy they brought it back for Commander Masters, because this was one that people were waiting for a while.
Yeah, the average mana value of this deck is 4.59, which is kind of unreal.
Kind of monumental.
For a Precon. Like, what is happening with this? There's a lot that makes this deck unique. This is the only colorless Precon, period. You might be thinking that Ululek is technically colorless. That's true, but the deck is not colorless. The deck is 5-color deck. So this is a very ambitious, unique presentation of a Precon. We've never seen anything like this, especially since we didn't really know if we could get a colorless Precon. It's got some of the biggest haymakers of any Precon ever. We've got Kozilek, the Great Distortion, a 10-mana thing that draws you a bunch of cards. Flayer of Loyalties, steals something, gives it Annihilator, and you just bash in right away. And then It That Betrays is like, that card is the real deal. That card will kill people by itself.
There are also some weird but cool new cards in here. There's Desecrate Reality and Rise of the Eldrazi, which are both colorless spells that really care about you just like having really big Eldrazi spells in general to play into it. I think that this brought a lot of good reprints that people were wondering about, and also just new spells in general that the Eldrazi players were thirsting for.
Yeah, and it was an interesting Precon in terms of like price point too, because it was really expensive. But it also it kind of backed it up a little bit. It had a lot of expensive Eldrazi, and it was weird to see the kind of just go, well, every Precon seems to be about at the $40 to $60 range. Let's just triple it and see what happens. And it's like, I guess that was pretty cool. Desecrate Reality, like you mentioned, is really weird. It like exiles things with, I think, odd mana values. And if you Adamant 3 colorless mana, you get an even thing back. Like, I love Kozilek. He's such a weirdo. And then Rise of the Eldrazi is just every original Titan's cast trigger stapled onto a 9 mana, I think it's 9 mana, spell where you just destroy a permanent, draw 4, and take an extra turn.
I mean, that's just so powerful. There's not really like that prior. I feel like that it's really tough to get some of that interaction sometimes and some of the stuff that the other colors just have like at their beck and call. So it's good to see that colorless got this in this Precon. And I feel like a lot of the cards now are just like more like thirsted for in general because not as many people were opening it because of the high price point.
Yeah, that's also true that you mentioned that like this deck just had to get a little scrappy. I think it's playing like Spatial Contortion because how you have to interact at instant speed in some way, but you have only colorless cards. So it was just so bizarre in a good way. It's very, very fun. The deck's game plan, obviously, ramp into Zul'Adok and just cascade value from just giant colorless spells. If you keep Zul'Adok out, I don't think that's super likely, but if you are to keep him out, you really can't lose.
And there's like some really great strengths and weaknesses in here. The strength is obviously it's really powerful in the late game. You get out Zul'Adok, and then if you can cast a spell after that, people are going to be so sorry because you'll be cascading twice into gigantic things too. But the weakness is just the curve is so high at the average mana value of 4.5, which is pretty stinky. And you just need to ramp as fast as possible, or you're just going to be dead faster than everyone else. But because you're not in green, you're not going to be ramping with lands. You're going to be ramping with artifacts, which means just one Vandal Blast or, one artifact board wipe, and you're pretty much out of the game.
Yeah, your scariest cards are actually like Worn Power Stone and Thran Dynamo because you have any assortment of 8 or 9 mana things, but if they can stop you for like 3 turns getting to those things and they just bully you, you're done. You're going to, at least if I'm in the pod, you're going to take like 25 damage.
It's just tough. I mean, high risk, high reward, right? If you can get there faster than everyone else, then you're going to be way ahead of the curve and you're going to be punching everyone way faster. But
if not, you deserve to be punched. You've got Kozilek the Great Distortion in your Precon.
But the best new card out of here is Darksteel Monolith. It's an 8 mana artifact with Indestructible, which lets you pay 0 once per turn for a colorless spell out of your hand, which is so high risk, high reward yet again.
Did you know that this card is actually like really high on the salt lists for EDH Rec? I don't know if that's a glitch or if people genuinely just hate this thing. I think it's like the most fair. You have to pay 8 mana and then you get like a 3 mana discount on some Eldrazi. If it sticks around or you give them flash and you can play more on each turn, that's annoying, but man, this is not Omniscience.
And it's not even like super abusable because it's not like you can shove this in a green deck and get like Crater Hoof or something gigantic out of it. It's like, okay, I have to play Eldrazi with this or some high mana artifact to get the actual triggers off of it.
I think what they're really salty at is the Eldrazi. But leave Darksteel Monolith out of it. Darksteel Monolith's a cool card. I think it's pretty good. The mana base for this deck, You're not going to see this in any other precon. 15 wastes and 23 utility lands. No dual lands required, no mana fixing required. It's just a bunch of utility lands that can either potentially tap for more than 1 mana with like the Tron lands, or just like go get you lands or go sacrifice to do something.
I mean, maybe that's why the precon's so expensive. 15 wastes? That's a lot.
15 wastes? That's worth way more than 15 planes.
Number 4 on our most unique precons is Buckle Up with the commander Kotori Pilot Prodigy. This is Azorius Vehicles, which is something we had not seen before, but Neon Dynasty really brought in a new era to this. She's a 1 blue-white for a 2/4, and vehicles you control have crew 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact creature you control gains lifelink and vigilance until end of turn. I feel like people might not know what I'm talking about right now, so let's actually talk about the alternate commander, Shorikai, which you might know this deck for instead.
Shorikai is 2 white blue for an 8/8 with vigilance, I think, and you can pay 1 and tap it to draw 2, discard 1, make a pilot that can crew vehicles pretty well, and that's probably the commander you've seen this precon with. That's basically what everybody switched it to, because Shorikai, spoiler alert, it's the best new card from this precon, so that is absolutely what most people did with this. But this is blue-white vehicles. The average mana value is 3.32. The deck's centered around 15 vehicles as its main win condition. I think it did commit pretty heavily to that, and I want to respect the deck for that. It ended up being a solid deck, too. We're not talking about Planeswalker Party that flopped a little bit. This was a reasonable deck that you can win with. I playtested this one a fair bit, and I like that it was faithful to vehicles as a win condition and not just saying like I have vehicles in the deck just to say that I did.
Yeah, you can just crew the vehicles with creatures that really give bonuses with that and just power them up, and just attacking with vehicles overall gave you an advantage. It's not just, as BZ said, like, ooh, they're just artifacts and so we're putting vehicles in because of that, or oh, it's a vehicle deck and there's 4 vehicles in there. They actually really committed to it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Kotori does work pretty well if she is your commander with Shorikai, because she crews it really easily and it hits for 8, and even if you're on the activate Shorikai every turn plan, you could still get in because it has vigilance and then activate it later.
But even though it is not strictly an artifact deck, one of the strengths of this deck is that it has a lot of artifact payoffs. Things that make your artifacts cheaper, like Foundry Inspector. Things that bring artifacts back from the graveyard, like Emery. Or just getting profit off artifacts with, like, Sai, Master Thopterist, to draw cards and just sacrifice your artifacts if you need to.
Yeah, Teshar is also another way to get things back from the graveyard as you cast historic spells, which are vehicles. And Kappa Cannoneer, sick new card from this precon. Made waves in Legacy when it came out. That's not really a factor, but I do enjoy that fact. And also just, that's a solid win con in and of itself. When the vehicles enter, it gets bigger, and then you attack for like 8 over and over and over. This deck also just had some premium instant speed removal. It had Swords, it had Dispatch, which is basically just another Swords. It had Generous Gift, and it has Reality Shift, and it had, I think, Crushed Contraband was the last one. And that's just like a pretty good solid instant speed suite of removal.
I played against this just out of the box, just with the main commander flipped, and it was pretty solid overall. It packed a punch.
If you flip the main commander, this deck is very good, just because Shorikai is very, very good. It won't have vigilance because you can't crew it with Kotori if she's not out, but it's basically not a vehicle. You just
It's a card draw engine.
You just activate it every 5 seconds and then crew your other vehicles with it. The mana base for this deck is 30 basics. I was surprised. That's like a ridiculous amount of basics, especially this is very much in like the modern age of precons where they were a little bit better about that. But yeah, 30 basics and only 7 fixers.
Though this deck is very strong with the fact that it has vehicles, unfortunately, winning with vehicles is tough because you don't have as much card advantage built into your commander, and you're trying to focus on like recurring things from the graveyard with things like Teshar and Emery, but filling your graveyard is pretty tough. There's no like flickering Emery or stuff because that's not the point of your deck, and so it's hard to put those things into the graveyard.
Yeah, blue-white recursion is interesting. I know artifacts can do that, but they didn't put a lot of ways to put artifacts in the graveyard. There wasn't really much proactive mill, so if you want to recur your stuff, you can. You just have to wait till it goes into the graveyard. It really seemed like they wanted to just switch out Kotori for Shorikai, because Shorikai puts things in the graveyard super, super well. Maybe they couldn't because Shorikai's like too good, but everybody switched it anyway.
I mean, people have eyes. They know what was like really popping with this deck, and overall, this was a pretty solid deck.
Next up is a precon that 5 years ago I would have told you they probably would never make. It is number 3, Corrupting Influence. The commander is Ixal, Scion of Atraxa. She's 1 white, black, green for a 2/5 with Flying Vigilance and Toxic 2. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of the library face down. You can look at it and play it, and you can spend a mana of any color. This is the Infect Precon. They made an Infect Precon. Infect is the most toxic, hated mechanic in like all of Commander, and they actually made a Precon of it, and I love it. I have no complaints that this thing exists. I think it's really, really cool. The average mana value is 3.26, so it's actually pretty low to the ground.
I mean, I was going to just ask, like, is it bad that I like this? Because
Nope.
in fact, was the big bad when I started playing Commander, and I'm happy it's being introduced in a more, I don't know, like bite-sized, manageable way. I like Infect a lot. We've both run Infect decks. I think it's pretty fair, and I'm happy to see it introduced in Precons.
I built an Ixal deck when this came out because I was just like, wow, that's so cool. You can actually do this now. It like supported other Infect decks and Toxic decks that already existed that were like kind of janky. And now the deck's like, I think it's very real. It's very scary. There's a lot of one drops with Infect now. There's a lot of ways to proliferate. And what makes this deck unique is obviously it's the only Infect Precon ever, probably to ever exist in the universe for all history. But it was just risky to make in general. I think there was a chance people just hated this.
Yeah, it was just so thematic, though. I'm happy they took the risk for it for the Phyrexian set, right? Like, that's just one of the most thematic things you can make for this. But it is, like, just in general, it's risky, as BZ mentioned, because it's dishing out poison. You don't even need to deal combat damage at a certain point to dish out the poison. And it's just, the direct kills is like, oh, I don't even need to hit you. I can just proliferate you fast enough. And then at some point, you're dead, and you might not even touch me the entire time. That's, like, I think that has the potential to set up for some really bad new player experiences.
Yeah, it has 10 or more ways, like 10 plus ways to dish out poison without hitting. And also, Ixal being your commander means you're always going to have flying poison, and that's not always easy to block. You're always going to be able to chip in somebody, especially if you just like fire off a removal spell. So yeah, this deck is sweet. It's very ambitious, and I love it. I love that we're just infecting people in a Precon. In this deck, you probably want to spend the first 3 turns landing toxic creatures, then you get up to 3 poison on somebody or everybody to start triggering Ixal's ability every turn and just get continuous advantage. You could win the game without poison too. That's kind of what I like about this. Ixal really just wants you to get to the first 3. So if that happens, you can just, accrue card advantage forever and try to outvalue them. But also you're still trying to get them to 10 poison.
I feel like it's a little bit weird with this deck too, though, because Ixal wants you to get to 3 poison. So in theory, you want to be poisoning the same person at least a couple times to be getting her ability as she comes out onto the battlefield. But the way with poison works, as we both know, is that if you are spending all your time focusing on one person, you might not be able to get the other poison onto the other people fast enough if you have a lot of proliferate in your deck.
You really need to get the first poison on each opponent, then start proliferating or doing those cards that like Infectious Inquiry, where you draw 2, lose 2, and then they just get a poison. There's nothing they can do about it. Those are sweet additions. For strengths of this deck, it just has non-combat ways to finish, way more than most Precons. Even if you just look at like how many ways can an average Precon end the game without combat? It's usually like 1 or 0, mostly 0. This is like, nope, I got a bunch of different ways. All I have to do is start the train, and then as I go around the game, landing like evolution stage or something, you're just gonna die.
I mean, there's also board wipes in here. You can wipe the creatures and then just sit around till you get the proliferate non-combat win phase. I mean, one of them I love in here is Phyresis Outbreak because it gives them a poison counter. It starts that train, and it also wipes the board depending on how many poison counters they have. So that was like much needed for poison decks.
This deck has 4.5 board wipes in it. I don't know if you want to count Culling Ritual or not. If you do count it, and I think you could, that's 5 board wipes. Like, there's so many board wipes, so you could just reset the board and then just slowly chip away every once in a while. You get a proliferate down. It's just absolutely like wild to me that there was so many wipes in here. They're just trying to, this is the Precon to like, they want you to hate this deck.
But for weaknesses, there's just some bad attacker deterrents in here. Why are we putting Ghostly Prison into every Precon? I feel like there's a propaganda effect or Ghostly Prison into every Precon that WotC puts out at a certain point.
Yeah, like obviously if you're playing the Infect deck, people are going to want to attack you, but also people mostly just want to block your stuff in the early game. So I don't think like Ghostly Prison, Windborne Muse, Norn's Annex are getting that much value. It's kind of weird that they're all in here. I don't really think that's a strategy of like, hey, don't attack me. It's like they're going to if it's really important, and if not, they're going to do something to you in some other way, like kill Ixal. That's probably worse for you. And so I don't know. Pretty weird. I would have rather just had more proliferate, but that's just like maybe a nitpick. But there's also some corrupted payoffs in here, which is fine because we're trying to get poisoned. But those corrupted payoffs need to give more poison. That's all this deck should care about. And it's like, oh, this mana rock makes your opponent lose 1 life if they are corrupted. Who cares? We're trying to poison them.
It doesn't matter if they're at 100 life or 10 life if you have poison. It depends on how many poison counters they're at. I feel like with this set in general, one of the things I remember of corrupted payoffs is like, ooh, this thing gets +1/+0 if they have 2 or more poison counters. It's like, okay, but how about the poison? Does it get more poison, like toxic or whatever? And the answer was never no. It was like at best it was like maybe it gets flying.
Right. Yeah, that was the limited set too. Like some of the archetypes wanted all poison and just get your opponent to 10 poison, but some of the archetypes only wanted 3 to then just kill them with regular damage. So that this deck was a little confused in that, but it was very much an infect deck. There'd make no question. There's almost no way you win without that most of the time. Best new card, Pheresis Outbreak. This is like the quintessential infect card now, where it's like put you guys to 4 poison, wipe your board, or finish the job if you're at 9.
I mean, this is the one-sided board wipe that poison decks really needed.
For 3 mana.
I feel like this is the card that we bought this precon to split up because he built an Ixal deck and I needed some poison cards out of it, and this is one of the ones I like windmill slammed into my deck immediately.
It's just so good. It's top 3 infect cards. I'm trying to think of the other ones, but it's very, very good. The mana base for this deck was 20 basics, 14 fixers, which is the most we've seen of a precon on this video so far, and 4 utility lands. So a solid little mix, and one of those was Karn's Bastion. Karn's Bastion, especially in the precon meta, will mess you guys up when we're proliferating. We go end step proliferate you to 8, untap proliferate you to 9, and then play something else and just win the game.
It's so good. I run it in my like spicy poison deck too. It's that good. But Moxfield.com is also that good. It's the best place online to build decks and see our decks. They actually have a new UI right now where you can actually search on our profile to see any deck we've ever made that's public.
I think that's pretty interesting. Go give us a follow, and you can also check out these precons from the official precon account from Moxfield, so you know that you're getting them all from the source that is the original precon. Whether you want to look at some planeswalkers, tiny wimey, poison, and the Eldrazi, or anything. But we're moving into the top 2 now. You want to get weird? Let's get weird. We got Symbiotic Swarm. The commander is Cathril, Aspect Warper. 2 white, black, green for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on any creature you control if a creature card in your graveyard has flying. Repeat this process for first strike, double strike, death touch, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, and vigilance. Then put a +1/+1 counter on Cathril for each counter put on a creature this way. Remember all of those weird bulk mythics and rares that said all of those keywords on it and then did something based on them? They're all in here. This is just the keyword soup deck, which makes sense for Ikoria because there was a lot of like keyword counters and creatures with abilities, and the average mana value of this deck is 4.21.
I feel like in this deck, you know, when you get the precons and you get the little punch out things, how many of those did you need to keep track of those? Because it's not like when you get a precon and it's your first deck, you're really like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to get like infinite tokens or something to write all this stuff on too. So I feel like people, I think those things are called like precon confetti or something. I feel like the word confetti's in there somewhere.
Pre-confetti?
Yeah, pre-confetti. That's what it's called now. But how many of those little tokens did you need for your entire team to make sure that everything was represented properly for your board state?
There's a lot that's making this deck unique. And like you said, one of them is that it's easily the most complex precon to play. You need a bajillion different ways to track a bajillion different counters on a bajillion different creatures, because Cathril doesn't just put them on itself. You can. It's probably a good move to do at least some of them on it because it has no keywords itself. But you're going to be moving around stuff to whatever's the best. Like, oh, this creature has Death Touch. Well, I'll make sure to also give it First Strike. Cathril, I probably want to give it Flying. And, oh, then it's going to get 6 +1/+1 counters. And then, oh, I'm going to put something over here. It's like, oh my God, how do you track any of this? Also, this is one of the only precons, if not the only precon, that can make a creature which is hexproof and indestructible through the hexproof of Slippery Bogbinder and the indestructible of either Karamitra, God of Harvest, or Zatalpa. If those are in your graveyard, you can use Cathril to give something hexproof and indestructible. If it's Cathril, great. It's going to be huge. But that is basically unstoppable at the precon level. So if you were able to pull that off, how do you ever lose?
I mean, we always roast about like, oh, why'd you put Zatalpa in another precon? But
this is the one.
This is the one where it actually makes sense to put it in here.
That could be the boon of uniqueness for this deck alone is this is the only precon that Satulpa's ever belonged in. That's already very unique, but it actually has a lot of going on. So this precon is just absolutely wild.
That's what made it number 2. Zatulpa's in here, and it makes sense. The deck's game plan is to fill the graveyard with unique keywords and just make sure Catherall can distribute all those keywords to your team to make them untouchable and just swing in for damage or just make it so that you just have the best board state at the end.
Yeah. The keyword soup deck, as it's sometimes called, has a lot of few potentially scary payoffs as the strengths, like Odric can just give whatever keywords you've put on anything to everything. So now if you've got First Strike, Lifelink, Death Touch, Double Strike, Haste, great. Everything has that now. It's super, super cool. Majestic Myriarch is a gigantic thing that cares about the creature count, and then it's got all those abilities, and it just hits like a truck, especially if you give it trample.
Unfortunately, though, with a weakness of this, it's just impossible to fill the graveyard. There's just not a lot of ways to do it. So you have to play your commander at the end to give everything keywords instead of just kind of doing like it incrementally to gain value. It's more of just a finisher commander than anything else.
Yeah. You got like 6 or 7 ways to fill the graveyard, and if you can get that and get lucky, that's great. But sometimes I think this deck wants you to hard cast all of your creatures with keywords, then have them die just as a feature of the game, like a board wipe or just removal or whatever, and then you play Catherall. So this deck is not busted. You're not going to be tutoring, you're not buried aliving for Kara Matron Zatulpa and then playing a Hexproof Indestructible Catherall. It is possible, but you got to get to the late game in like a pretty fair way. So this deck is not busted by any means. Best new card, Slippery Bogbonder. I love this card. It's just a way to distribute all your counters at once to something. Plus, it gives Hexproof, which is super, super useful.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, even though there was a free spell in here, it was Obscuring Haze, which was not the good one of this cycle. It was everything but this.
Yeah, you wanted any free spell but Obscuring Haze was the good one. The mana base is 18 basics, 13 fixers, and 7 utility lands. I don't know if we're ever going to see Keyword Soup again on a precon. But this brings us to the number 1, what I think is the most unique precon. Kind of by a lot, this deck is so weird. It is number 1, Subjective Reality. The commander is Aminatou the Fate Shifter. White, blue, black, 3 loyalty planeswalker, +1, draw a card, then put a card from your hand on top of your library, -1, exile another target permanent you own, then return to the battlefield under your control, -6, choose left or right. Each player gains control of all non-land permanents other than Aminatou the Fate Shifter, controlled by the next player in the chosen direction. That part is not really factoring into this uniqueness too much. This deck is a Miracles deck, kind of. The average mana value 3.95, so pretty clunky, but the deck is all about top deck manipulation, controlling what the top card of your library is through like Miracles. We have Terminus. We have that can put all creatures on the bottom. We have Entreat the Angels to flip and make a bunch of 4/4s. Entreat the Dead was a new one that reanimates X things, and it gets cheaper to cast if you Miracle it. There's also Manifest going on in here, so you're caring about what the top card of your library is, and I guess then you're like, oh, there's a good creature on top of my deck. I better manifest it with Primordial Mist or Jeskai Infiltrator, the guy who plays the shell game with the freaking manifests. And also Scry is here. Sigiled Starfish is in this deck, unironically. Crystal Ball. Also, Ninjutsu is in this deck because we've got a bunch of ninjas and stuff and combat damage. And also, one more thing, there's random, gigantic, odd CMC mana value cards for Yennet Cryptic Sovereign.
I played against this deck out of the box. It was one of the decks that, like, one of the only decks that my friend owned, maybe the only deck my friend owned, and we couldn't figure out how to get this to work when we first started playing, so instead, we thought it was a chaos deck like Precons, and we thought the main goal was just to get to the end and shift everything, because we couldn't figure out what the main theme of this was, and it was like, well, it's not the commander, and it's not the ninjutsu, and it's not the miracles, and it's not the manifest, so what is it? I guess it's to gain control of the best board to the left or right of me.
Like, this deck doesn't really flicker. Aminatou is typically seen as a flicker commander. There's like 4 good cards to flicker in this deck, or I guess you could flicker a land if you want to make a mana with her -1. Just, what is so weird? This deck is so weird. And initially when we had looked at this deck, I was like, oh, this was the Miracle deck. That's super unique. There's only like 5 Miracle cards in here. There wasn't even that many. I don't know, man. The strengths... We got to get to the strengths. The deck can be pretty okay if you find one of the 4 cards in it that has good ETBs, because that's what Aminatou excels at. Her plus is pretty bad. It doesn't actually push you up a card. It just filters a good card on top of your library. But again, there's only 5 Miracle cards in this deck, so what do we do? Are we going to set up a Manifest? Really?
I mean, the weakness of this is just it doesn't do anything in particular. You're not flickering your 4 cards. You're not going to be doing, you're not going to be scrying. You're not going to be doing the shell game or whatever. I mean, you could, but it's not like it gets you to any real win con in general.
Like Sarah Avatar is in this deck, which is just a 7-mana thing that is a star equal to your life total. What does that have to do with any of what I just mentioned? And also, that's part of like the suite of just random 7-drops that are just in this deck. At least, though, we do have Amanatu's Augury. That's a very good card and can maybe bail you out of scenarios where you are behind because you're playing the Miracle Ninjutsu Odd CMC Manifest deck.
Amanatu's Augury is a cool card, but I feel like with this deck, you're never getting to the point where you can play that because it's like, oh, well, you don't have anything to do. I guess I'll just keep hitting you. I mean, I feel like, people are getting with commander damage for overall with precons. It's like, oh, what does your deck do? I'm not sure. Okay, take 5. I feel like that's the only way you're really going to ever do anything with this deck. You're just gonna take 5.
Yeah, just should take 5. The best new card is Yuriko, Tiger's Shadow.
Why is this in here?
This is where this originated.
This can't even be the alternate commander of this deck. This deck is Esper.
But you see, it's got ninjutsu, it's got top deck manipulation, and it's got a payoff for having random 7-drops in your deck. So
yes.
I guess that's what they were going for. There is Yuriko, and there is 1 or 2 other ninjas. That's it. And there's not really a way to sneak them through. You just got to figure that out.
Yes. So if I wanted to swap in the alt commander, I would just have to take out a third of this deck. That's really my mistake.
No, there's a different alternate commander, Yenit Cryptic Sovereign. That's the Sphinx that cares about odd CMC.
Oh, no, I was talking about the fact that this has Commander Ninjutsu, and it's in the 99, and I can't even make it my alt commander.
That still works for Ninjutsu. It's equal. You can use it from your hand or the command zone.
Okay, that's still weird, though. I don't like that.
Yeah. We got 16 basics in this deck, 16 fixers, and 8 utility lands. But I wanted to also mention, this deck has 21 tap lands in it. I don't know why. It's just so random. I think this deck just is a fever dream. I don't know how we all got through this. This is such a weird deck. If anyone has stories of playing this deck or being confused by this deck, definitely let us know in the comments. And if you want to check out some more pre-content, you can watch it right here.